So as you can see, we're welcoming somebody back tonight. This is Dr. Matthew Schmidt, who is an assistant professor at the University of New Haven in Connecticut. He's also an alumnus of KU, an alum of Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies. And it might have been Soviet and East European Studies.
No, I'm not that old.
They're already made the transition.
No.
All right, well done.
There wasn't Eurasian, I think, when I was there. It's just East European, I think so.
All right, so we had the chance, I was approached by a couple of his professors, or at least one professor and then also somebody that he worked for, who sort of gave us the heads up that Matthew was going to be in town, and it would be great to have him come and speak. You know, one of them basically said, "You have to do this," and she's somebody that I listen to when she says that. So we're very happy to have him back. He is going to be speaking on a topic of which with which he's very familiar, having spent some time in Ukraine on the ground, working as an OSCE election observer. And so he's going to tell us a little bit about what that was like, and also maybe do some predictions as well. And so I'll turn it over to
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. It's great to be back. I feel like I'm home again, really, in so many ways. I don't so much want to talk tonight as show you some pictures, in case you haven't seen things. Most of what you'll see here are my own shots. You'll see some journalism thrown in there that I couldn't get, some of my friends' photos. Mostly I just want to have a conversation, because the truth of the matter is there's a lot more knowledge about Ukraine and Russia sitting out here than there is right here. And what you're going to see here has been created to talk down to a lower level than what I have in this room. So please jump in at any point with questions or comments. So this is, what you're looking at is on the Maidan. That banner in the back is covering over a burned out building from the fighting. Obviously you all know where Ukraine is, we don't have to orient ourselves. Yeah.
Is there any chance we could turn these lights off?
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Greenberg, right behind you there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Is that better?
Yes.
So I don't need to orient this crowd. I was in Dnipropetrovsk ultimately as an election observer, standard information about educating people who speaks what, and that it's not true that everybody only speaks Ukrainian in one part of the country and only Russian in the other. I'll give away my theory right now. I think that the war in Ukraine is as much a quasi-religious war for Vladimir Putin as it is anything else. Yes, economics, security, these things are all important, but I think this goes back to the fundamental point that in his eyes, Ukraine is not an independent country. It's the frontier, it's the borderland of Russia and of the Russian Empire. And right, this is ultimately, if you believe him, right, this is New Russia in here. And you know, it's interesting, I wrote my master's thesis when I was at KU on Alexander Dugin and the Eurasianists, and I have found that you know, coming back to me all year long, over and over, as I have been watching the events go on, as we watched Putin you know, accept Crimea into Russia in St. George's Hall with the language and all the trappings of accepting it as a czar. So that's my thesis, and I'll throw that out there right now, and that has a lot to do with where I think Putin will go and how he makes his decisions. So I think he's rational, but he's quasi-messianic about it, and that will make a big difference in how the West needs to handle it. This is the Maidan. Please jump in, those of you who were there before I was. So I was here at the end of May during the election, and this is what it looked like when I was there. It had already started to be cleaned up. The joke on the ground was that it had never been cleaner than when it was occupied. So we can talk about some of that. These are right, impromptu meeting space. The hotel in the back is key because this is where the government snipers fired on the crowd from on the fateful day of February 18th. And when you're on the square, it completely dominates everything and has perfect sightlines. Thank you, Apple, for panoramic shots. And angles and times again. You can see the hotel up there. looking down. What you see in the left, that is a memorial to protesters who were killed on the 18th. You can see some of the barricades are still here. You can see here that the cobblestones have been ripped up, so that's why you see the manhole covers sticking out. When I was there in May, there were huge stacks, pallets of the cobblestones being ready to be put back down, be repaved. It has in fact been repaved now, and essentially all of this is gone. You can't read that. It says Novi Ukraine. These, of course, are the rules which were essentially copied word for word from the Occupy protests here in the States, which is what kept it clean and organized, because of course on one end of the square you had, right, neo-Nazis, and on the other end you had, you know, hippie leftists, all on the same square. It was kind of extraordinary, actually. They were organized, medical facilities. Over here you see the famous wooden shields that were put together. They were basically layers of hard plywood compressed against each other. They could take shots, but they might take one shot from a sniper's bullet and could deflect it. They weren't going to take 2 or 3. And here you see some of the gas masks, helmets, the things that the protesters used. They made all sorts of things up, and they just had these things spread out already when I was there to show the tourists, to say, look at what we did here. For those of you who are interested in how the economy is doing, those are 30 eggs for 70 hryvnia. This is right off the square. It's a brew pub, right? So you have an economy moving. On the one hand, you have people making their own beer, and yet, right, when you go to the schools where the polling stations were, you still have the squat toilets. And when you talk to people on the ground, when you talk to the protesters who are still in the square, in essence what they're saying is the reason we were there is because of this, right? Because we've been to the rest of the world and we see the quality that is across the line in Europe, and we want to be a part of that, and why are we still shitting in squat toilets? This is another view of the square, burned out buildings in the background. This was a display that was funded by the UN to show the work and the contribution of the women of Maidan. It's pretty extraordinary to wander through. I'm sure most of you know, but one of the things I like to tell crowds all the time is the movement where women took their clothes off and wrote on their bodies, "My body is my weapon," and stood in front of the police and dared them to fire, and eventually began writing those words in different languages to invite women in other countries in Europe, Germany and France and Italy, to do the same and to come and support the protests. I think that the movement runs deep now, and when you're there, even here, right? When I was there, the great debate was: what are we going to do with this space? It had been used for concerts, and the question was: now that we have fought here, now that people have died here, is it blasphemous to hold concerts here again, or is that in some way sort of the greatest honor that we can give those who died here? Yeah.
You were referring to those girls that were ripping off their clothes. You are talking about the movement Famine.
Uh-huh.
So you have to know that by feminists and groups in Ukraine, they are not considered fighting for feminism. They are considered like faking the idea and harming the gender equality issues and the whole idea of feminism.
some aren't. I mean, some people say that, and other people think that they do stand for feminism, right? It's the classic divide between what was, you know, sort of Slavic feminism versus what the movement looked like in the West. You
So
know.
official feminist idea of that, and women who were working on this, women of Maidan, are not considered as a feminist group.
No, they're not considered. These aren't considered part of the formal organization, right? But I think the question we're arguing is are these considered feminists in the lowercase sense, and are the women of Femin considered feminists in the lowercase sense? So. This is what you saw on February 18th. This was the fateful day. Again, I'm sure you've all seen the pictures, but I'd like to show this to other crowds so that they are not mistaken about what happened. Mr. Greenberg was there. He can talk more about it. Again, most of you are fully aware of this, but just to give you a sense of the animosity on the streets, you can see the toilet paper and the wipe your feet and the choke on your gold bread. Sense here. So what was the election like? Right, well, these were everywhere. This is Tymoshenko's party. By the end of the election, she had actually stopped campaigning in any meaningful sense, and she sort of took this slogan literally and had commanded her organization to raise money and deploy people to where the fighting was. One of the other things, right, you can see this. This is everywhere. It's absolutely everywhere. These are children's drawings. This is the swag from the OSCE. Those of you who want to know what it's actually like, if you want to know, okay, there you go. You sit in a large Soviet opera house and you listen to the entire international community tell you don't get yourself killed or captured when you go do your work for 2 days. So here's what I saw in the elections. First of all, if you look in all these pictures, except for the gentleman here, what you see is that it's all women, right, as usual. Right? The women are doing all the work in these situations. But what you don't see is that the head of the District Election Commission here is, of course, a man. Who's being directed by the women, but nonetheless, he's men. You can see the ballots. For those of you who aren't familiar, maybe, with how this works in this part of the world, the photos. This is the sort of the command room, and this is a precinct election committee there. One of the things that what happened is we would go in. So I was in Dnepropetrovsk, and we went in a couple of days before the election and started meeting with precinct election commissioners, introducing ourselves, trying to get them to feel comfortable with us so that we could do our job later on. So the first day goes by, and of course everybody tells us when you say, what are the things you're concerned about? Altogether they say, nothing, no concerns whatsoever, everything is perfect. Sort of a classic Soviet attitude of, you're an official, we don't want to tell you that everything isn't perfect, and off we go. This frustrated me. So I began working with my translator to put together a little speech to try to get more information out, and was much more successful the second day, and started to get real information which amounted to, here's what they were concerned about. Normally they would have about 18 election commissioners. The election commissioners were drawn from all the different parties. There were at-large members. It's a very sort of wide open, messy process. They had 12. At one point, went into one precinct and they had 10, and I said, okay, why do you only have 10? And they said, well, we normally, we're shorthanded anyway, right? Other people only have 12 because we've had to pull this election together in a few weeks. And they finally admitted that the reason they only had 10 was because 2 election commissioners stayed home because they were afraid of violence. People always ask me, were you scared when you were there? And I said, well, not really, but there was real tension. So there had been violence in Donetsk. Election commissioners had been attacked. Families had been threatened. So Dnipropetrovsk, because it was close to Donetsk, because that is where Ukrainian forces, both official and unofficial, were deploying from, there was a good deal of tension. That was one of the things I learned. Then I started, we were supposed to look and make sure that the police that were supposed to be on premises but not where the ballots were in fact not where the ballots were. And what I noticed instead was after a few precincts where I saw a classic elderly police officer, either with no sidearm or with a hip holstered sidearm, I noticed that suddenly it changed to footballky wearing strong younger men wearing shoulder holsters. And I started to inquire a little bit gently at first as to what was going on. Was this a different uniform? Why the different holster, et cetera, et cetera. Eventually I got the information out from one person who was quite forthright with me that said, no, I'm a member of the Dnieper Battalion, this private battalion that was set up by the oligarch who was put in charge by Kolsmoisky, who was put in charge of the city. So I said, well, this is fascinating, and I'm a security specialist, so let's talk. And basically he explained to me that on election day there would be about 600 people running around the city, some with weapons, some without, providing backup to the official police. In addition, that this battalion had units stationed outside of Donetsk blocking the roadways coming into Dnipropetrovsk, and then again units outside of Dnipropetrovsk in the direction of Donetsk blocking there, and they didn't expect anything, but they were prepared. So there was real tension, but in the end nothing happened. The day of the election, the night of the election, I was on all night on the 24-hour shift in the district election office. What you see here is an Excel spreadsheet that was put up because the official Central Election Commission database was hacked that evening and was brought down. And so those precinct elections, those districts that had this kind of capability had suspected this. In this case, this precinct, this district had suspected this might happen, and so they had developed a complex spreadsheet on Excel to continue the count. And they were able to then send it in electronically through an alternate means instead of through the official means. But this was the biggest thing that happened on election day. Turnout was high. Poroshenko ends up winning, I think, with 54% of the vote. Don't quote me on that. It was well over 50. And this was the biggest event that happened, and it dragged out the actual count for a couple of days, which made me very, very tired. You know, again, right? You can see the state of the classroom, the state of the desks here. It was very well organized, but I couldn't help but again walk in and look at this and think, this isn't what it looks like over the line in Poland. So this is some of the aftermath of the war. Before and after, this was just built for the World Cup. These are pictures that my friend sent me from Donetsk. This is the rough count right now. I would add that I had the Institute for the Study of Violent Groups try to do a count because I was curious as to how big the rebel units might be. So I tried to do a casualty counts on them, and this was back in early August, and had an estimate that there were somewhere between 8 and 13,000 rebels based on my count. And of course those numbers are out the water as soon as you have 15 to 20,000 Russian troops come across the borders, and now we basically don't know. So if you go out on the internet and you look for those numbers, what you'll find is that you can't find them anymore. So nobody really knows the amount of fighters that are still on the ground. But I don't want to end on a sad note there. This was the coffee shop around the corner from my hotel in Dnipropetrovsk. It was quick. They finally figured out that they could serve kefir to health-conscious Westerners and charge outrageous prices for it. You could get fresh juice of all varieties. It was quite amazing. And I talked to the owner and her husband. Her husband had been in London for some years and then had come back, and they decided to put together this coffee shop, independently owned, and talk to them about their hopes for Ukraine. And they were supporters, of course, even in Dnipropetrovsk, even as Russians, right? They were supporters of a new Ukraine. They were supporters of bringing Ukraine into Europe, of making it a European-style parliament with European levels of corruption instead of Soviet levels of corruption, with European-style education systems. They wanted this for their children. They had made a stand here, and pretty much everyone that I talked to was supporting this. Some people that I talked to through friends who are in Donetsk, for instance, are ambivalent. They hate the Ukrainian government right now because the Ukrainian army is incompetent and it shelled the center of the city and it blew a lot of homes up and businesses and killed a lot of people. And so naturally they blame the Ukrainian government for that. But they have no more love for the Russian government. And really their attitude is quite ambivalent. It's, I don't care who's in charge, just make the fighting stop.